You're listening to Big World Network.
Average, Season 1, Episode 9. Written by Jonathan Thompson, read by Heather Thompson. Okay, maybe I'm not being fair to Cosmo. He was like my grandfather, and I did love him, I just didn't like him. I respected him, appreciated what he and his family had done for me, listened to his advice, put up with his meddling, and helped out in his garden like a good boy. But I didn't enjoy any of it, and the rotten curmudgeon knew it. As Dad and I crossed the street for Sunday dinner, I prepared myself to face off against Cosmo's passive-aggressive mind kung fu. I planned and practiced responses to his jabs that were just naughty enough to back him down without leaving me open for another attack. You couldn't give him too much information, but you also couldn't leave him hungry for more, because he would get it. As you can see, an evening with Cosmo LaGuardia took preparation. So, Dad paused when we had reached the walkway leading to the LaGuardia's front door. How are we handling the Bart attack? But it was all anyone talked about at school, so Dad was probably guessing that the news of it had reached the LaGuardia homestead. Same way I handled it at school, I said, shrugging my shoulders. Tell them that he pleaded for mercy and ran away when I let go of him. I smiled. Oh yeah, I'm getting a medal on Wednesday, for my bravery. Dad was behind me, and I could hear his shoes scuff against the pavement when he stopped short in surprise. Awesome. It had, indeed, been pretty awesome. Sure, Dad's plan hadn't revealed that I had any superhuman abilities, but it did make me look a lot cooler than I really was in front of the whole school. Publicly chasing off a supervillain who had trashed school property was pretty much the holy grail of high school achievements. And it wasn't necessarily a lie, either. Bart had been scared witless when I went for him, and probably would have ran if I had given him the chance. Sure, that's only because he assumed I was just as supercharged as my father, but you play the hand you're dealt, right? The strongest weapon I had was his assumption. Heck, it was my only weapon, so I had used it. We reached the door and stopped. There was always this sort of awkward exchange at the LaGuardia's front door, with neither of us knowing the correct way to proceed. Cosmo was always telling us that we were family and didn't have to knock, so we should just walk in. But that's weird and dangerous. Also, it wasn't just his house. He lived there with Vinny and Gail and the rest of the family, so I always felt like we shouldn't take those kinds of liberties. A few times we had tried following orders and just let ourselves in, but it never ended well. Once the door was simply locked. That wouldn't have been so bad if Cosmo hadn't been inside yelling at us to just come in already and ignoring our yells back that it's locked. Other times we only saw blurs of people scamper away, slamming doors behind them, so one could only guess what was going on there. Eventually every other member of the family started locking the door when they were home, silently shutting down Cosmo's forced form of hospitality, but I was grateful for the resolution. On this particular Sunday, Dad knocked. Almost before the full knocking routine was completed, Vinny opened the door smiling as much as he was capable of. Behind him, out of sight, Cosmo yelled, "Why are you knocking? You're family!" Vinny frowned and shook my dad's hand. "Hey George, you better get to the kitchen. Il Duce is waiting." No one called Cosmo Il Duce to his face, and even behind his back, it was only used in special situations when he was being especially tyrannical. Officially, it just means Duke in Italian, but contextually, it was the title that Benito Mussolini adopted when he took over. Now, in the minds of Italians, it pretty much translates to big, bad fascist. "Hey, Quinn." Vinny turned his attention to me while Dad made his way to the kitchen. "I heard you had a pretty exciting day on Friday." I liked Vinny, but he sort of frightened me too. He had always been warm and patient, not necessarily extending himself emotionally, but not getting in Gail's way when she did. But this wasn't Vinny I was talking to now. This was cop mode Vinny. He was a big man, almost the same size as my dad, which, considering he didn't have the bonus of superpowers, was pretty intimidating. Vinny was also a sort of local hero, or as much of one as a cop can be in a small town. He was known for going above and beyond, helping his neighbors before they had a chance to ask for help, and showing up at calls before the call was even made. Vinny had also been one of the first volunteers from Carmel to sign up for the search and rescue work following 9/11 in New York City. But we never talked about what he did there, and none of us ever asked. Yeah, it was pretty intense. That was a pretty dumb thing to throw yourself into, Quinn. But, I started. I still don't know how I plan on finishing that sentence, though. But I thought he was going to reveal that my dad, your childhood friend, is a superhero. But he insulted my honor and challenged me to a duel. But, yeah, I still have nothing. Thankfully, I was saved by Cosmo. He appeared in the doorway, his stocky frame taking up most of the opening. I could see clear over his head to the table where everyone else was busy at work getting everything in its place. Grace was seated, not helping, but no one expected her to. When I was younger, I was completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of these Sunday dinners and didn't understand how they could manage that much food. For a long time, I had a theory that the LaGuardias and possibly all Italians only ate one massive meal a week, like pythons. Vinny, would you sit down? Everybody's waiting on you. For as much as Cosmo boasted in his Italianness, he didn't have an accent and was actually pretty American. He had been born in New York, as had his parents and grandparents. So I think he just went overboard with things like Sunday dinners to remind us all that he was, in fact, Italian. As if a name like Cosmo Giuseppe LaGuardia wasn't proof enough. Quinn, he said like he hadn't seen me in years. Your hair's a mess. Hey, George, don't you want a comb? He called to my dad in the kitchen before turning back to me. Come on, Quinn, I made you chicken parm. It's your favorite. In reality, I couldn't remember ever having his particular brand of chicken parmesan before. Regardless, I have never in my life, before or since, thought, man, I am really jonesing for some chicken parm right about now. Out of sheer spite, though, I immediately thought, I hate your chicken parm, you old pain. And for a split second, the little old man looked up at me like he was going to punch me square in the jaw.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.